Greetings. I am Rob Kwan with Unreg LA, and Ross Weisstroffer is joining me from Fair Rep LA. And while we give people a couple minutes to join us, we just wanted to kill some time and make sure you're aware of everything that's going to be on your ballot this upcoming year. And of course, we are not talking about this in a manner of advocating for the election or defeat of anything or anyone, but just for public informational purposes, wanted to make sure you know that this year in 2026, every single citywide elected official in Los Angeles is on the ballot. Every single council member that has an odd numbered district is on the ballot, and every single school board member that has an even numbered district is on the ballot. And this June, we will probably see a number of ballot questions that the council is looking to put on the ballot to help balance the budget. Revenue generating measures. Katie Yaroslavsky, the budget chair, has referred to them as a potential Christmas tree of revenue generation. So you will likely see some issues popping up on your June ballot along with the candidates. And in addition to charter reform joining the November ballot, we are seeing a lot of activity from outside groups looking to advance measures to the November ballot. So there will potentially be a very, very crowded list of questions for you to look at in 2026. We can get going right now and dive into things. We are here to talk about the Charter Reform Commission and the upcoming purge. It sounds a bit dramatic, but this really is going to be a very, very important and decisive week coming up. We have an agenda that's going to start off with a very, very brief Charter 101, giving you a background on how charter reform happens. We will also talk about the commission, how it was created, who is on the commission. We'll try to give you a rundown of what has happened over these last 6 months and what we're looking up towards in these final 3 months coming up for this Charter Reform Commission. We'll talk about everything they're looking at policy-wise. There are what they're referring to as four main buckets that capture a bunch of issues, and they've been working their way through that. This upcoming January 17th, they're going to be having a new committee formed that will try to narrow the very long list of things that are currently on the table. So there are some things that are potentially in danger. We'll try to give you some insight on how you can help. And then we'll open things up and offer some space for anybody that would like to talk about issues that are pressing on their mind. Any kind of coalition letters you might want to throw out there if you've got anything. We will also answer any kind of questions you've got, and happy to hang around and just talk shop. If you've got any thoughts on charter reform generally or random lingering questions, please feel free to hold on to those. But as we go through here, if there are any questions you have about what we're moving through, please feel free to throw those in the chat. Ross will make sure to pop up and flag those questions. And so you know, the slides for this presentation will be posted online, so do not feel as though you need to take notes or find links. They will be easily accessible for you, and they will be posted on our YouTube where this presentation will end up later tonight. So with that, let's get going, Ross. Next slide. So the LA City Charter is the city's version of a constitution. Very similar in that it's something firmly rooted and has a lot of really big, important powers, but it's important to also remember that we are not the supreme law of the land. We are just the city of LA. The California law has power over us. The California Constitution does, and federal law, the federal Constitution do as well. So this is not like the US Constitution, but is very, very similar. Um, Changing the charter is something that you have to do through a charter amendment that goes before the voters, and it needs to receive majority approval of the voters. And if we're talking about, we have a really weird charter situation in Los Angeles where we have the city as well as LA Unified School District. And if we're talking about something impacting LAUSD, it has to go to that bigger, wider populace of people within LA Unified School District. That is why when we voted on redistricting in 2024, there were two separate questions, one for the city council and one for LAUSD school board. The easy way to get something on the ballot is just 8 votes on the city council. You get the mayor's signature, or the mayor doesn't veto it, and it moves along to the voters. A much harder way to do it is to gather signatures. That requires 15% of registered voters, 320,000 or so voters. If you were actually doing that, you'd probably need around 400,000, potentially more signatures to actually get 320,000 valid signatures. And that might not sound like a lot, but that really is a lot of time and effort. You would probably be spending somewhere between $2 and $5 million to get something on the ballot. You could also have an elected commission. You could generate an elected commission with that same signature threshold and put that question in front of the voters, or the council could put that question in front of the voters. The unique thing with an elected commission is it has the power to put things directly on the ballot. The other way to do things is what we're doing right now, where we have an appointed charter reform commission that ultimately is just advisory and handing over potential recommendations to the city council. Next slide. A huge chunk of our charter is really based off of the 1925 charter 100 years ago. That is actually where we ended up with 15 council members. And that charter was most recently overhauled in 1999. There was a famous set of dueling commissions, an appointed commission as well as an elected commission that ultimately came together. Charter Reform Commission, when it's successful, you have a big, wide, diverse coalition. You have organizations involved. You have clear messaging, engagement, something that's a lot harder to do when you're dealing with a very constrained timeline like we are in this charter reform process. Next slide. The city structure, there's components in the charter. Do we skip a slide, Ross? Yes, charter versus ordinance. A really important thing to flag here is not every problem has a charter solution. And this is something that even our commissioners can at times struggle with. It's very tempting to look at the problems that we have out there and feel like this is the hammer. And that's not always the case. If you're concerned about a pothole on your street that's not being fixed, that's a service delivery issue. There might be ways to improve how we handle potholes by changing the law, but if you're trying to change the structure of public works, have somebody empowered at the top that's really able to direct those departments and coordinate them, that's a charter problem. So, charter is for broad structural issues. We're outlining whose power and responsibility is what. We also have ordinances that those are just laws. The council can do those on their own with their mayor's signature. That's where we get into the precise details. Those are issues that maybe aren't really important, where we need to protect them from the council's meddling. There are things where we need to have flexibility to make adjustments. We might need to make adjustments to, um, you know, the campaign contribution limits, make adjustments to our public financing program and how much money is available for candidates, or the max amount that rent can increase in the next year. That's something that we just saw go through. And on the next slide, we'll just kind of really, really briefly give you an overview of some things within the city structure that are outlined in the charter. The next slide goes over a bit more on governance. And then the next slide just flags some other issues in the charter like LAPD, the Board of Education, the budget process, Parks and Rec, LADWP, civil service, retirement, pensions, all kinds of good stuff. Next slide, please. How did we get here? Well, it was a long, long time ago, but we had a huge earth-shattering set of scandals in 2022 when the Fed tapes were released, and we had a renaissance of reform at LA City Hall. It felt like they were ready to really just buckle down and change the place. We had council members talking about how they have too much power, and the council president has too much power. The incoming council president, Paul Krikorian, said he wanted to change that. And to some extent had some really good successes, and there was a whole lot left to be desired and a whole lot punted down the line. In the summer of 2023, as our city council was talking about the issue of council size, they realized how much it impacted other areas of the charter and how this could impact how delivery of services happen and the extent to which, you know, council members are able to get departments to do what they want them to do. So this was something that spurred a desire to have a more comprehensive look at the charter and our city's governance. Some of the reforms, like redistricting and ethics reform and some other minor tweaks, went to the ballot in 2024. But in large part, the big, juicy decisions were kicked over to this commission. And in September of 2023, we had a motion introduced to create a charter reform commission and establish regular charter review. That was passed by the council in June 2024 and signed by the mayor. It felt like we were ready to go. There were a lot of concerns that we had limited time, but things were moving. Next slide, please. Moving to the Charter Reform Commission. This commission is just advisory. It does not have the power to put things directly on the ballot. As I mentioned, some places like Portland allow their commissions to do that. The elected commission in the 90s had this power. We do not have that power here, unfortunately. There are some key council files that you can look back to if you want to learn a little bit more about the general context on charter reform and see the ordinance that was established. The scope of review, this commission was not limited to looking at a specific thing. That is something that we saw 10 years ago. A lot of people think the last time we had a charter reform commission was in 90s. That's not true. We had one about 10 years ago that looked at our alignment of elections and ultimately recommended moving our city elections from off cycle, they happened in odd numbered years, to aligning them with state and federal elections and dramatically boosting turnout. Um, the This commission that we're looking at has some things that the council has asked them to look at, but they have the full power to look at everything within the charter and potentially add new things to the charter. Next slide. There are some big ticket items that a lot of eyes were on. The size of our city council, as I mentioned, delivery of services. Um, Attached to that council size issue was a previous council attempt to reduce the number of meetings. They had been looking to reduce the number of meetings from 3 a week to one per week. There's been a growing conversation on having a 2-year budget. There's been a long simmering desire from our neighborhood council system to see reform on that front. The details of our neighborhood council system were very much not flushed out in the 99 charter reform process. And it's a review of that is long overdue. And of course, we've had about half a dozen council members vacate their seats on the council within the last 10 years or so. So we've had a number of situations where we have trouble filling vacancies and some old, outdated, inconsistent language in the charter that has made it hard for us to fill vacancies. A specific example of that is, when Nuri Martinez resigned from her seat, we had a special election. And before that ever happened, we had a vacancy in Council District 10. Normally, the council would be required to have a special election. They did not because the charter doesn't clearly delineate what a temporary vacancy is. So they did not feel like they could confidently have a special election while Mark Ridley Thomas was on trial because it was possible if he were exonerated, he would be restored to the city council and we would have somebody that was duly elected in Councilmember Ridley Thomas and somebody duly elected from a special election, and they might have competing legal claims to that seat. So those are the really big items that were front and center in the beginning of the process. We have a gigantic list of issues the council asked them to look at that is linked in an attachment that they submitted to the commission. And on the next slide, other reforms. There's really no reason that you can't be creative in this process as long as it doesn't violate state or federal law or the Constitution. That being said, we are a bit late in the process. So there are things that the council did not originally ask this commission to look at, like ranked choice voting, lowering the voting age, having non-citizens serve on commissions. But those are things that did end up on the table through advocacy of a number of organizations. Next slide. So you might be asking, why should I bother with this process? Well, obviously you're here, so you think there might be some reason, but there really is a whole lot of value in engaging. And this set of recommendations sets the stage for what the city council is going to be looking at. The city council does not have a ton of time. They're going to have their hands busy this year with the budget. So this document they will be submitting by April 2nd will be very, very influential in what the council even has the opportunity to consider. It's a lot easier to influence these commissioners than our council members. You might know that it is hard to get a meeting with a council staffer and even harder to get a meeting with a council member. But it's a whole lot easier to get time with one of these commissioners or to hang out after the meeting or during a recess and chit chat with them about what's going on in front of the commission or what pet ideas you've got out there. So it's a whole lot easier to influence this process. And your hopes of getting something through this process afterwards are a lot tougher than moving through at this commission stage. Next slide. So who is on this commission? We have 13 commissioners, or we're at least supposed to. We only currently have 12. The first eight were set to be appointed by elected officials, four from the mayor, two from the council president, and two from the council president pro tem. That's just kind of like the vice council president, if you want to think of it in a more straightforward way. We have had a transition of power and a vacancy on the commission. So that's why you see an additional appointing of authority there in Bob Blumenfield. He has just appointed somebody in December, Jason Levin, and that is pending council approval and will be up for a vote this Friday. The council president appointed Martin Schlageter, a former city staffer. Ted Stein was appointed by Paul Krikorian along with Mona Field. A lot of extensive history in LA City politics. And Mayor Bass appointed Raymond Mesa Jr., Melinda Murray, a former ethics commissioner, Christina Sanchez, and Robert Lewis. So those were the first chunk of commissioners. And on the next slide, you can see the second step to the process. We had those the next five commissioners chosen via open application. It didn't end up turning out the way we wanted to originally because there was a huge delay in getting this commission off the ground. So they did an abbreviated appointment process where the commission staff selected 20 finalists, and then the commissioners chose five people from that group. Those are Carla Fuentes, Andrea Mack, Michael Yap, Diego Andrades, and James Thomas. The interim chair at the very start of the process was Raymond Mesa, and after a little bit of a battle between him and Ted Stein, ultimately Raymond Mesa Jr. was chosen as the permanent chair for the process moving forward. Next slide, please. So how's it gone so far? Um, as I said, there was a really tight timeline for this commission when it was getting off the ground in the summer of 2024, and that was made significantly worse by Mayor Bass dragging her feet and making her appointments, waiting about 6 months. We eventually recognized this was going to be an issue, so a number of us came together to submit a letter asking Karen Bass to make these appointments. That was in January of 2025, and it wasn't until the end of May or so of 2025 that she finally made her appointments. There's some coverage of this issue in Politico that you can find on this page. So far, the commission has had a lot of presentations and been learning a lot, but has not done a lot of deliberation. So there's really not been a kind of cleansing of the palate. And that is why we are kind of pivoting to this moment right now. They've delayed significant decision making until this point in the process. If we can go back, another challenge that we have with this commission is that we've kind of barely scratched the surface of policy details. It's one thing to decide we want to have a 2-year budget. It's another thing to decide the details, and figure out how this aligns with a new mayor coming into office. The extent to which we have enhanced public input at the beginning of the process when the departments are making their proposals. That's something that we've seen added to the county side of things, where there is actually a public process where the board members interact with the departments and the public has a chance to weigh in instead of their county CEO just kind of popping up out of the Jack in the Box and presenting their budget. There's actually something happening at the front end. Another issue that the council is concerned about, and a lot of advocates are as well, is that we have very little time to deliberate on the budget. So there's been an effort to look at, maybe beefing that up. So even if there's a lot of consensus on a 2-year budget, the details have a lot that they need to, figure out to even get to, final charter language. Another problem that we've seen with this commission is the commissioners don't have real power over the staff or their own budget. This has been a challenge, and this is a major difference from our redistricting commission that we had a few years ago that was very flawed, but at least the staff there had, or the commissioners had power over their budget, and they hired their staff. Instead, this staff was hired by the mayor and the council president. We've seen the council a bit L/O is lack of. Just reading the chat, there's a lack of power over the staff and budget and a lack of council discussion. They were supposed to approve the commission's outreach plan, and the full council this far in the process has not actually had that come up for a vote. Earlier this past summer, Councilmember Rodriguez and Padilla introduced a motion asking for off-the-record communications to be disclosed. This is something we had for redistricting. So if a commissioner came to a meeting and they had met with, council member X when that meeting began, they would have to say, I met with council member X on this date. We talked about personnel reform. And if they got a text message from the council member during the meeting, at the end of the meeting, they would have to say, I got a text message from the council member about the upcoming schedule. So it's not a huge thing, but it does offer transparency. And unfortunately, we don't have a good idea of who is talking to who. We're seeing a lot of interesting chatter from the commissioners about elected officials reaching out to them and talking about things and expressing preferences, but we don't have names. So that little bit of transparency would go a long way. Some of our council members have been super engaged with this process. I would note Council Member Tim McCosker and Council Member Nithya Raman definitely come to the top. We've had a few council members kind of make some repeat showings, and the city controller has been super engaged through this process. The Fair Rep LA Coalition had 2 presentations in front of this commission, and those links offer you the slideshow as well as our presentation to the commissioners and the Q&A that followed. These are notable because for both of these presentations, everything we talked about moved forward for the most part. As far as we presented on the 3 main concepts for a new council structure, and we took a really, really deep dive into the removal and discipline process for elected officials, with a huge, huge thanks to Ross Weistroffer for putting together an amazing spreadsheet that looks at dozens and dozens of jurisdictions across the country and how they handle this. So those were really, really influential in guiding what ultimately ended up on the table for the commission. Next slide. So our remaining calendar for 2026, this week we have a few straggling policy committees that are going to be wrapping up their work. Unfortunately, for the last 3 months or so, we had these 4 separate committees that we're working independently of each other. So they're kind of running into tension now where they have some overlapping interrelated issues and we've got to bring things together. So that is in part why we have a single committee meeting over at least two meetings on the 17th and 31st that will be making recommendations on how we should narrow what is on the table. The full commission will look at those recommendations in sometime potentially early February and approve or maybe revise those. So important to note this Saturday coming up, it is not a do or die because even if you make it through the hoop, you still got to make it through the full commission. And even if you get rejected at the committee, you got a chance to live again at the full commission. Um, after they decide what to move forward and what not to move forward, the staff will have to do another round of reports to get more into the weeds as far as details and specifics that I referenced earlier. Then, only then, can they turn to the city attorney and say, give us the language. Give us the language with the words struck out, the words inserted, exactly what we need to change in the charter. So that's a whole nother process. Then they got to wrap it all up and tie it with a bow and have a final report ready for approval and get that turned around to the council no later than April 2nd. The council will have a few months to marinate on that, and they have to ask the city attorney to pull together specific language by about mid-June. And then in the first week of July, they will have to make their final choices as far as language going to the ballot before they head into their summer recess. So that is a very hectic 3 month or 6 months that we have sitting ahead of us, with a lot of important work happening over the next 3 months. And of course, this will all go to the November 3rd, 2026 general election ballot, hopefully. Next slide. So we have four main buckets, as I suggested, and these are really, really broad and encompassing. The first one is government structure, looking at the size of the council, whether we want to have a different system entirely. We have single member districts, 15 individual council districts. There are other proposals to do something like Portland, where districts have three people in each district and they are elected in a single election via proportional ranked choice voting. A really, really cool, innovative system, but might be a bit tougher of a sell than single member districts. There is kind of a bias towards what people are familiar with, especially with our elected officials. The other option is one that the a group of academics recommended to the city council a few years ago, and that is to have city council districts and overlapping with that have regional representation. And that might sound really weird and complicated, but there are a ton of cities out there in this country, like Seattle, like Boston, where they have a large chunk of their commissioners chosen or their council members chosen by district, and a smaller number of them chosen by the city as a whole. But our city is so large that there's concern about whether or not we could do something like that. And that's why there's kind of been this pivot to maybe having regional representation. There's been a look at elections, reforms we could potentially do there, a whole giant tug of war between the CAO and the controller, the CAO being the chief administrative officer, figuring out how we get a CFO designated and what we might need to reorganize. There's been some dramatic proposals put in front of the commission this past weekend that got a lot of public pushback. So who knows what happens on that front. There's been a lot of growing frustration amongst our city council members with our city attorney, and that has kind of renewed a look at the idea of splitting up the city attorney's office. Back in the 90s, there was an effort to break up that office and have an appointed city attorney that advised our city officials and an elected city prosecutor who's only focused on criminal misdemeanors. That is something that has gotten some renewed push, and there are a number of council members that have popped up in support of that, including everybody from Council Member Rahman to Council Member McCosker, and it's very much the quiet talk of the town. There is a look at adopting something like New York City has, where they have an elected public advocate. We've suggested some minor tweaks to enhance the independence of our redistricting process, and there's been some looks at increasing who can actually serve on commissions. Our newly created redistricting commissions allow non-citizens to serve, and that is not something that applies for our regular commissions. The state law actually allows everybody to serve, or non-citizens to serve on commissions with the exception of the redistricting commission. So it's kind of the reverse of what we have here. And that's in part just because the redistricting commission was established a long time ago, not that long ago, but a little over 15 years ago. Some takeaways from the commission discussion on government structure. They are firmly committed to sending something to the council on council size. What that is, they are firmly undecided on. They are the committee originally recommended looking at all three options, and a pretty broad range for council size in the range of like 23 to 31. And last week, the full commission said, please, government structure committee, make up your mind a little bit more and narrow that. We will see how that goes at tomorrow's meeting of the Government Structure Committee. We've also heard, some groans from the council on this issue of council size, a lot of concern from them about how their power and influence over departments might change. And even advocates of council size, like Councilmember Rahman, when she spoke to the commission, noted that as much as she wants to see the council grow, she does not want to see that happen if we do not address the issues that we have for how departments work and delivery of services happen. Um, there's a really big and undecided battle over, some of those financial responsibilities I mentioned previously. And there's been some skepticism that's been thrown out there from some of the commissioners on some of the electoral reforms, like lowering the voting age, and reducing the barriers for candidates to get on the ballot, or establishing that Office of Public Advocate. I see a question in the chat. The committee has already agreed to adopt ranked choice voting model, or are they just currently considering it? That's a very good question. And they last year in November said we want to look at ranked choice voting. This is something that we're moving forward. And there have been a few commissioners on the full commission that have expressed some pause on that. And they, in part, I believe they want the committee to look a little bit deeper at everything related to council size, structure, and voting models such as ranked choice voting. So ranked choice voting is very much on the table, but it is in danger of being taken off the table. So it is there. I also see a question on policing reform. We will get to that. For many of us over the last 6 months, have been wondering where is policing reform? And it took a little bit of effort, in large part, thanks to folks like the League of Women Voters of Greater LA, LA Forward, Catalyst California, and Ground Game LA were able to help force that issue onto the table, because there'd been a lot of us out there, and including a lot of commissioners trying to see that move forward. And unfortunately, it took way too long to get them on the table, and that's kind of why policing reform's in a bit of a precarious place. Next slide, please. I want to make sure we have enough time to get into things, so I'll be a little bit more brief here. There's a lot of stuff regarding removing and disciplining elected officials. In particular, what do we do with a situation like we had after the Fed tapes? There was nothing that we know of that Nuri Martinez, Kevin De Leon, or Gil Cedillo did that was illegal, but everybody was outraged and wanted to see them removed from office. Um, and as much as we might want to see our elected officials easily able to remove somebody who didn't done something distasteful like that, that's kind of on the eye of the beholder. Some people might view um, some of the positions that our council members have currently as worthy of removal. So this is something that we would like to see a careful approach on as far as expanding the ability to potentially remove people. One idea that we flagged is the city of San Diego has a method where instead of having to go through an expensive recall process of signature gathering and then elections later and all that, they actually have the ability as a council in certain circumstances to ask the voters, do you want to remove this elected official? So that at least avoids a situation like they had in Washington, D.C. recently, where the council removed a council member who was under investigation, and that person got elected to the council again. So you at least put the power in the hands of the voters and avoid any kind of potential abuse. Neighborhood councils are something on the table. Ethics reform, anti-corruption, the preamble of the charter, that's just the introductory kind of language that does not have explicit power. Some of the takeaways from this is there is an absolute consensus on prioritizing issues regarding the vacancy removal and suspension. Um, there's a lot to be figured out as far as specifics, but there's a commitment to moving on that front. Unfortunately, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, which oversees our neighborhood council system, has been very MIA and missing in action and have not really offered up significant reforms to the commission and has for months on end said, we will get back to you in January. And my concern when I first heard about that was that is way too late to get in the door. And we're already seeing it in that there is a purge lined up before we will see the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners actually submit their proposals. I have not had a chance to look at those. I've heard they're a bit of a mixed bag, but they have apparently put together some recommendations, and I believe we should see those in front of the full commission on January 21st at the Van Nuys City Hall. So as of now, anything impacting neighborhood councils is very superficial and underwhelming. So that is an area of concern. The Ethics Commission submitted a bunch of reforms, but I really don't know how many of those will make it through the meat grinder in the coming weeks. One of the things that we're trying to advance is some tweaks to the public matching funds program. Not tweaks to change them, but to potentially allow the council to make changes down the line. We'll get into that a bit more later. And thankfully, I get to take a break here, and Ross is going to take over for the next bucket.
Absolutely. And just one more additional note. I know that here in Los Angeles, of course, questions related to the federal immigration authorities are also on our mind. Trying to squeak through at the last minute is the Represent LA Coalition's proposal to enshrine the right to access counsel for deportation defense in the charter. It will, of course, depend on getting into the next staff report, but that is one of the efforts that is also on the table. Next, moving to planning and infrastructure. So this has been one of the more substantial, in fact, I would argue the most substantial deliberations around planning infrastructure have been taking place here, thanks to the valiant efforts of Commissioner Slagiter to really put forward meaningful proposals for exactly how we can create a service delivery systems that indeed make our potholes better. And with the enthusiastic participation of Commissioners Melinda Murray and Commissioner Ted Stein, who, to dive right into the start of our planning reforms, is always happy to mention his personal experiences with the Board of Public Works. His wife was a former Board of Public Works commissioner, and despite there being a lot of chit chat at the council, especially by Council Member Tim McOsker about getting rid of the Board of Public Works and moving to a completely different system. Just so happens they are in the charter. So anything regarding the charter has to, of course, go through this committee, and the this particular committee has been very clear that the Board of Public Works is not going anywhere, and they're much more interested in reforming the Board of Public Works rather than getting rid of it altogether. And we will go back through and kind of talk about some of the takeaways and where sort of the effort is going in a moment. But in addition to what to do with the Board of Public Works, there's been a lot of discussion about exactly how to shuffle the deck on different kinds of exactly where the Bureau of Street Lighting is going, where the Bureau of Street Services is going, what different duties the Department of Transportation is going to have, and or who is going to be managing another big proposal on the docket, which is a capital improvement program. As has been noted by many, many times, Los Angeles is one of the only major cities in the US not to really have one codified. And see, you will be happy to hear that that there's been a lot of enthusiastic support for this capital improvement program. But there's also, of course, the issue of exactly who will be administering that capital improvement program, but we will dive into that in a moment. In addition to the CIP, there has been some discussion just starting to scratch the surface of a kind of overall question of lots of different city departments running to the commission, asking for the same kind of special dispensation that, for instance, the Los Angeles Public Library has, in that its budget is protected or has a clear source of funding guaranteed to it somewhere in the charter. Also under planning, there have been some requests by the Department of Recreation and Parks to have different kinds of special dispensation to, for instance, be able to issue debt, to have clear authority over its parklands, etc. And we've also heard a presentation from the Community Forest Advisory Committee also asking for additional resources. Moving quickly to additional planning issues. There's been some discussion about replacing the area planning commissions and other kinds of ways for people to appeal planning decisions with just a single central Board of Neighborhood Appeals, just because there are so few appeals that they are not being evenly distributed. On the very hot topic of council land use, the Commission has mostly been interested on amending the so-called councilmanic privilege portion of the charter, Charter Section 245E, that allows city council members to potentially weigh in on a particular issue. We'll dive into that a little bit further, as well as in a moment, as well as the question of how different departments potentially have authority over city-owned land, whether or not, for instance, there are weird kind of extra bits of the charter that, for instance, guarantee or limit the floor area ratio, like very specific kinds of planning requirements for even the most basic projects that are still have just been embedded in the charter over time, as well as questions over how the Department of City Planning's decision making kind of operates and moves because some of those processes are set forth in the charter. To circle back and talk about how the commission has kind of been addressing these issues. Again, there's been a lot of pushback immediately to eliminating and getting rid of Charter Section 245E. To briefly respond to Steve's from the chat's remark as to how useful Chinatown, the movie, is in understanding current city council dynamics. Uh, there is a uh, Los Angeles is in fact changing, and we did see, I think, some appetite by the commission to at least try to make this process more accountable, to not, for instance, allow city council members to effectively just sit on issues and not allow them to move forward without a potential shot clock or some kind of limits on their ability to just effectively filibuster a particular council decision. There is also interest in, again, just trying to make the system that's currently outlined in the charter clearer and just flat out better. However, it is simply the reality that despite the valiant advocacy of the ACT LA Coalition and Barrett LA member Abundant Housing LA, many of the recommendations that they made to, for instance, to try to alter parts of the zoning process to try to ensure more housing simply did not get past this commission. There is not the kind of appetite for really anything I think more radical than tweaks to the current system as it is set up in the charter or those requirements. On the bright side, or as some people might think, this also means there is not particular appetite for protecting, for instance, single family zoning in the charter or other things that would more lock in or harden up current parts of this planning system. So I know that that is a lot. And Rob, is there anything else that you'd like to add or highlight in regards to planning and infrastructure?
No, all good. And I just wanted to jump in and say this all may feel very overwhelming. You thought we were doing a lot with charter reform. It gets crazy, and this is in part why they are trying to narrow things. And I would just say that if it is feeling overwhelming, that is very normal. Just kind of anchor yourself to what you're familiar with. I'm sure everybody here has their own kind of pet issues that they know a little bit more about than others and their own experiences. So we will kind of give you an overview of everything on the table and just kind of find your home there and get your bearings straight. And if you you will, as you kind of absorb more along the way, it will become a lot more native to you and not sound like a foreign language. But I did want to just jump in because there is a lot of city hall lingo that we might be throwing at you, and do not feel intimidated by that because I promise you our commissioners feel the exact same way, even the most informed commissioners, because it's just really hard to know everything there is out there about the charter. And they all kind of come to the table with their own experiences and strengths and weaknesses. So you're a lot more similar to them than you might feel like. And there is a good question in there about how we can build more accountability into the charter that Ross will touch on in the last of the four buckets.
Absolutely. And just very briefly before moving on, I do want to highlight we have seen actual decisions and agreement and consensus for the most part, mostly on actual issues in this bucket, to use one of my least favorite words, around moving forward a capital improvement program, capital infrastructure plan. The devil, as always, has already been in the details. We have only started to scratch the surface about the different motion proposals in play around who might potentially again be administrating this. Commissioner Slagater has proposed a chief coordination officer. Then who do they report to? If that proposal is effectively moving forward, but there are just a lot more details to get worked out. And David, just to quickly speak to your question about building in accountability, again, I think the commission on planning and infrastructure, they might not necessarily want to move very radically, but are very concerned about or thinking about, again, how can we create structures that effectively automate some degree of accountability around these decisions. But that's also a question related to more better government reforms that we can dive into towards the end. Moving to budget and personnel. And honestly, if you thought playing in infrastructure was a big bucket or had some complicated insider city lingo, you have never watched multiple presentations about exactly how the city's budget gets made. I would rather watch a presentation about how sausage gets made, honestly. It would be more entertaining. And I would feel less disgusted after. But regardless, just to jump in, starting with issues related to the budget, there is, I think, already a clear consensus emerging that we need more runway, more time for the city to be able to really think through and be very clear about its projections about how we get a budget done. Where there is much less clear consensus about is exactly whether or not this also means additional public input. I mentioned I see it going through a lot of presentations about the budget. The chief administrative officer, the CAO presented. There was a great, beautiful pie chart that showed all the different processes of how the budget, the exact timelines about how the budget gets done. And then the new 2-year budget pie was presented, and the little slice where the public has input was still 1 month. So there are still some questions and issues around exactly for whom a 2-year budget will benefit in the way that it is implemented. For instance, going back to our tug of war between the CAO and the Controller's office, the Controller has presented to the Budget and Personnel Committee, has made clear that he would like additional processes to make the budget creation process more participatory, more performance-based, and other kinds of metrics that are going to try to make the budget process more accountable. Have also been a huge bevy of potential changes regards to hiring practices and personnel. And here we see less a tug of war and more a free for all between with extremely long lists of proposed changes between multiple city departments, multiple coalitions of city unions, and that city not even scratching the surface when it comes to the personnel department, who I think have still not gotten in their final recommendations for the charter. So um, that is a still ongoing process. Who knows? The Department of Dunn and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment might actually beat them in terms of getting their charter reforms in. It is the reality, I think, that if you thought there's going to be a chainsaw taken to the long list of recommendations made by the Ethics Commission, that will also not even scratch the surface just because there have been so many, honestly, genuinely fantastic, well thought out, and just so numerous potential proposals for changes to be made to the different portions of the charter regarding personnel. Also swooping in has the LA City Employees Retirement System. We have not really had a thorough discussion about this in front of the committee, but they are certainly proposing a lot of different potential changes to the way that the different language is structured. And we are also thinking ahead already to the next time that we will be able to engage this lovely process, which will hopefully be less of a time crunch, and exactly how we can make sure it is less of a time crunch and make sure the process moves forward in the future by enshrining that right in the charter is also being considered. Finally, I know that AI and whether that can or can't be addressed in the charter is a topic of public discussion. Tech equity and Lane, Los Angeles Alliance for New Economy, has come in and proposed a series of rules embedded in the charter around whether or not the city can procure certain tools, and if so, how do they do it? So again, there's just so many incredible ideas on the table here, and it's just the reality that I'm not sure many of them will be able to make it to the end, but I'm looking forward to continued discussion. At this week's committee meeting, many additional departments have yet to weigh in, like LADWP, airports, and more presentations to come. I'm looking forward as well to the LA Black Workers Center, who have been very active in this process, presenting their proposed reforms formally in front of the committee. I believe that's all from me. Rob, please feel free to weigh in on this important topic.
I think we're all good. Um, and one of the kind of frustrating things is there's been a bit of delay in actually having our officials meet with labor. This is in part why certain provisions did not get put on the ballot in 2024. And this is a necessary step in the process, and they are only now turning to that, which is a bit concerning. But nevertheless, if we can move to the next slide, what we just gave you was like really, really bare bones. So the new committee that has been formed, they have asked the staff to put together a comprehensive list of everything that's potentially on the table in a central place. Thankfully, for Fair Rep LA's purposes, we have Ross Weishofer, who has already done that. So that is a great link for you to just kind of get a taste for the gigantic mound of things. Because for a lot of the issues we flagged for you just now, there's like half a dozen to a dozen sub issues within there. If you're trying to get a deeper look at a bunch of these issues, you can check out the most recent staff reports. For some of them, issues contained in there have maybe been pulled out and voted down. For some of them, there are more up-to-date reports that have been added. Like there is a government structure report you're looking at that was presented to the commission last week. And since then, there have been new reports submitted to the committee that will be meeting tomorrow. So there are a few places you got to check, but those are some places where you can learn a lot more about the issues. And for anybody that's looking to catch up on particular issues, um, we record and post video for these meetings. Again, thank you to the MVP Ross Weisdorfer. Uh, and those are really helpful because the audio quality, video quality is much better than the commission's video and audio. And we include timestamps. So if you're trying to find the section on the city attorney's office, or you want to look back to Saturday's meeting and you want to see the juicy conversation on whether or not we should gut the controller, you can just click right to that and you're not searching around and you can use your time efficiently. So, on to the next slide. What is on the ropes? And this is not an exhaustive list. And frankly, some of the things that are on the ropes we don't even know about. There were some things last week that made it through that I was not expecting to make it through, and some things that got kicked off that it just seemed super straightforward and safe. Um, the first thing up there is LAPD accountability. There are a number of potential reforms included in the personnel and budget staff report that will be heard on Thursday. And some of those include minor changes regarding LAPD, some of them more significant, like should we have seven police commissioners instead of just five? And should we give a different person the ability to appoint some of those commissioners, or should they all be the mayors? Should we require certain experiences and background that might be relevant to diversify the voices at the table? Like, should we require a public defender to be one of the commissioners? Um, should we have somebody that's been impacted by the justice system? There's also been a look at LAPD officer accountability. Measure C is kind of a good example of charter reform gone wrong. In 2017, we weakened the officer discipline process, and everybody's kind of realized how much of a disaster that is. And there was an attempt last year to place a measure on the ballot reforming that, and the mayor ultimately vetoed it. So this is something that's potentially on the table. Apparently, the Board of Police Commissioners will one day come up with recommendations on that front. Who knows? I think the biggest issue regarding LAPD that we've seen with the Trump administration is our council members struggling with their lack of direct power over LAPD. There are certain departments within our charter, like the Department of Water and Power, like the zoo, like the airport, like the port, that have their own kind of insulated power. And our elected officials cannot meddle with them. And that's why Bob Blumenfield had a hard time protecting the elephant from getting sent off across the country. That's why our council members were not able to actually pass a sanctuary ordinance that was binding on LAPD. That's why when there was a long-standing policy to not use tear gas at protests, and that has changed this year. And our council members do not have the direct ability to change how LAPD uses tear gas or less than lethal launchers at protests. So there are certain ways in which our elected officials would very much like to see that changed. At the same time, there have been concerns expressed from folks like Tim McCosker that we don't want council members messing with deployment and overtime, those kinds of decisions. So there are legitimate gripes on both sides. We'll see how that gets navigated. I would just say that because there are so many things that were added related to LAPD at the last minute, and because this is kind of a third rail issue at City Hall, we will probably see some significant trimming that happens on the front of LAPD. We will not see that at this Saturday's meeting. The agenda has come out for Saturday's meeting, and they will be focused on government structure and they will be focused on planning and infrastructure. Those are the two things that will be in front of the committee this Saturday. The other issue is neighborhood council reform. That is in the better government bucket. And again, will be on the table on January 31st. So, Judgment Day on neighborhood council reform is a little bit delayed, but is looming. So, for anybody that cares about more ambitious reforms to our neighborhood council system, that is a very, very important window to potentially get those things through onto the table. There is a lot of real. I feel like some of our elected officials treat neighborhood council reform like a can of worms, and they are just overwhelmingly intimidated by the idea of uncorking that. And that is potentially in part why there's a lack of ambitious reform on this front. Ranked choice voting is something that has a number of people on the commission very, very much interested in it. And a couple people have expressed pause about it. Um, and the multi-member districts, a little bit of a similar situation. I think one of the issues that we're running into is that there's reservations about compounding the number of reforms we put in front of voters. Council size is a big thing to digest. Ranked choice voting is another layer. Multi-member districts are another layer. In reality, I think the people that will have the toughest time with all of that are not the voters. I think it's our elected officials. And unfortunately, they're the ones that have the very important say in the process. So I do think to some extent that might be clouding, the calculus that some of our commissioners have on the issue of ranked choice voting in multi-member districts. So they are very much still alive on the table. Tomorrow will be a very, very important committee meeting at 4 p.m. at LA City Hall. Remote public comment and in-person comment available. But these are particular issues that, if you care about, this is a very important moment for them. Ross, if you wanted to add anything to those first three, feel free to do so, but I'm gonna hand it off for you to take over voting age.
Absolutely, and very briefly, I'm really hoping that we see from Bonk and the department and Dunn some of the really fantastic ideas for neighborhood council reform that have been in multiple community impact statements that have not yet made it into the Better Government staff report. My understanding is that's because, again, they're waiting on the consensus process to continue. But again, if any of their ideas, which are also I have listed myself out in Barrett Ballet's list, if any of their ideas especially strike you as important and that have been given in public comment before, just continue to support them and submit them. And I really hope to see some of them move forward, but that keep a close eye on it. Going back now to question of lowering the voting age, the reason this is on the chopping block is simply because it has not been very fully or clearly addressed up until right this particular instant. Fair Ballet Coalition did present this in one of our slides at the August 9th presentation, but looking back, it did not make it as into the staff reports as a official recommendation for the committee, the government structure committee, to even consider until November 19th. So we are now playing catch up and we are doing our best. As I linked in the chat, I could go on and on listing all the reasons why this particular reform is great, but you don't have to worry about that because they are all listed in nice, neat bullet points in the memo, Fair Rep LA's memo. And so I'm just going to say personally that this reform does mean a lot to me, and I think it's worth supporting, partially because the evidence is just very clear that 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds display the same degree of political knowledge, of the capacity to deliberate everything that they need to be able to participate in our democracy as 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and many older people who also have the right to vote. But also this is personal because I myself got involved in being civically engaged precisely because I had access to a program to encourage people to vote to pre-register as voters in the state of Colorado at 17. It's interesting and it really strikes my imagination to think about how many more people we could get involved in civics in Los Angeles if we entrusted them with the ability and the power to vote. And finally, I'll just say that the Fair Up LA Coalition has, since the beginning, been concerned and focused on making sure that LAUSD, the second largest school district in the nation, and its students are also part of this charter reform process. And we have not really seen very many major or meaningful reforms being discussed at the table at all. That is especially unfortunate when 5 years ago, the process of allowing USD students to be able to vote for Board of Education members who are, when they're 16 and 17, was so brutally interrupted along with their education by COVID. There was all this incredible momentum for this reform, and we are now trying to pick it back up again and get it over the finish line. That is just what LAUSD students who had their education deserve, is to have that process uninterrupted. And again, feel free to dive into our memos to learn more. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Rob.
And we have pivoted a bit on this front to specifically advocating for only lowering the voting age for LAUSD elections. Some of us would really like to see it for all city elections, but because we're entertaining so many changes on the council side, it is a bit of a challenge to include this as well. The arguments for giving young folks the ability to vote in school board elections is a bit, you know, easier to make. People are generally speaking more receptive to it. And there's a really good argument. Like they're directly impacted and they've gone through the school system. Whereas, me, I went to public school in Santa Clarita, which is very different than the public schools that we have in the city of Los Angeles. So in my mind, they have just as much of a right as I do to weigh in on their elections, even though I've lived here 20 years. Like I did not go through the LAUSD school system. So the other issue there is because this impacts LAUSD, it would be a completely separate question. So if we are only looking at lowering the voting age for LA Unified School District, it would not impact the broader charter reform proposals. It would be a standalone question. Um, the last two issues we wanted to flag is the public financing of elections here in Los Angeles for whew, 35 years, we have had a public matching fund system. And when we came out with that, we were really on the cutting edge. It took a long time, not until 2018, for us to overhaul that system. And we've seen some huge gains as far as having a more competitive environment, going from having no incumbent elected officials voted out of office for about 17 years to pretty much one every cycle, if not more. So we've also gone from having just two women on the council in that time to having a majority women on the council. Um, this is not the time to change the system, but there are interesting systems out there like Seattle. They have a democracy voucher system where um, every single voter is given $25 or $100 in vouchers that they can give to candidates in $25 increments. So instead of just having people go to donors and having that money matched, we're turning regular people into donors. So it's a very different transformative system, but we would have to change the charter, and that would require going back to voters. So we are looking for one really small tweak that the Ethics Commission has endorsed, and that is changing that specific language so we could have a different type of public financing of elections down the line, passed via ordinance without having to go back to voters. The last thing is the elected office of public advocate. And to get a real feel for that, you kind of have to look into it a bit. There's a memo there you can check out that gives a bit of a history of this office in New York. It's a bit unique to the city of New York. When they were expanding their city council about 30 plus years ago, more than that, they were trying to be cognizant of how having more council members would make it harder for the council to overpower the mayor. It would weaken the council in some ways, and they wanted to make sure there was somebody to hold the mayor in check. So they created this elected office. It used to have some unique powers in that they would preside over council meetings and potentially cast tie-breaking votes. But the thrust is they are kind of the stopgap for delivery of services, a kind of complaint department of all sorts. So if you're having problems with getting a pothole filled and your 311 request was prematurely closed, you can go to them. They are in some ways a charter cop that can put people on notice that they're not following the charter and demand a response. They have an ability to carry out kind of investigations, and they are a non-voting member of the city council, able to introduce and second motions, and is a non-voting member of every single committee. So they are in some ways a kind of voice for the people, somebody that can't be put in the doghouse. And what I mean by that is if you have a council member step up and criticize the council president or do something the council president doesn't like or in a way they don't like, you're going to have a really hard time getting potholes filled all of a sudden. You might find yourself moving from the Budget and Finance Committee to the one that oversees neighborhood councils. And that's something that we've seen from our council presidents of past, like Herb Wesson. We saw with Nuri Martinez, and we have seen with our current council president. So having somebody that's able to speak up is important. Another interesting dynamic here with the public advocate is they are potentially somebody who could preside over council meetings. That is a former power in New York. And we have all of these issues with how our council meetings run, how much time our council members have, as well as how the deliberations play out. A year ago, part of the reason Monica Rodriguez was in the doghouse or is in the doghouse is she called out quote unquote backroom deals with the way a certain vote moved forward at the council, where instead of them considering the thing coming from the committee, the council president whipped up an amendment behind closed doors, and all of a sudden that was the thing moving forward, and it was kind of gutted and amended. Having somebody that can't be put in the doghouse can be powerful and help as far as having somebody to speak up, somebody able to decide, we need to have more public comment. We can't limit it to 30 minutes. And the council would still be able to overrule him, but it would be a significant, notable way of diminishing the overwhelming power of the council president. Um, the other notable thing about the public advocate is they are first in line to become the mayor if there's a vacancy or the mayor is out of town. So that gives them a kind of citywide profile that makes it easier to get media attention. And it answers that question that we almost faced when Eric Garcetti was primed to get the ambassadorship to India. And if that had happened, we would have been in a crisis where Nuri Martinez was asserting, I can be council president and mayor as long as I want for the rest of this term. And there were other people on the council who said, no, you can't. And we will appoint somebody different. And thankfully, we did not come to that crisis point, but we almost had a really big charter problem on our hands. So these are some of the really big issues that we wanted to just flag. We plan on having some talking points available in a couple days. For some of these issues, we have some coalition letters moving along, and we'll have some more in the pipeline. But we can move along to the next slide. There is this new committee. We have assignments. Ted Stein is the chair. Joining him are Raymond Mesa Jr., Melinda Murray, Diego Andrades, James Thomas, and Christina Sanchez. Notably, 3 out of these 6 people are all appointed by the mayor. You should expect these to be very, very long meetings, stretching from 9:30 in the morning until potentially anywhere from 5 to 6 p.m. Who knows? Um, the there will be a significant reduction of issues on the table. As I said before, these will have to go in front of the full commission to get the stamp of approval. The outline for how they will be deliberating is laid out there on the right side. Meeting on the 17th and 31st. Hopefully, they are able to get through everything in those 2 meetings, but there may be a need to have an additional one at the tail end. And on to the next slide. How to help at the very, very top, that link, FRLA 26, is our meeting info page. You can find a uh, all of the links you need for the meetings coming up, as well as talking points, additional resources. It's a good home base to find things. Um, you can submit public comment before any of these meetings coming up. Just note that you have to email those in before 3 p.m. the day prior. All of the meetings that happen at City Hall have Zoom as far as a comment option. This is not something that we always had, but thanks to public pressure, we were able to eventually get them to provide the remote public comment option. The upcoming meetings are all listed out there for you. Again, the last one on the 21st is at Van Nuys City Hall, and there will not be remote public comment available for that one. Um, Talking points should be up by the 15th. There are two coalition letters that you can find links to. One specifically on lowering the voting age for LAUSD elections, and one on the issue of public financing of elections. More to join here, but I wanted to just pause and note that if anybody has anything that they would like us to add to that page, assuming it is not something outlandish or foul or offensive, we will be happy to place it there we hope for this to be a place where we can kind of collect things like this that we're producing and as well as others. And I wanted to just check, are there any questions in the chat that are outstanding, Ross?
Yes, I just want to go back and speak to David's question of how we can address accountability, just because I know there is so much kind of also floating across multiple committees. And I know that there is a kind of question too about LAPD issues and exactly how that can be addressed effectively.
So, charter accountability, there are a few ways to look at this. One, we have a better charter and we don't wait 25 years to comprehensively review things. So having regular charter review and doing it in a better, more intentional way than we are right now is a big step. One upside to splitting up the city attorney's office is our current city attorney has a conflict of interest in that they represent our elected officials and they can't bring charges against their client. That is a long-standing interpretation of the law that they have had going back decades. I believe going to former city attorney Ira Reiner. So by splitting up this office, we would actually free up a elected city prosecutor to operate in the same way our district attorney does, and potentially bringing, ethics charges. And this is important to note because we have all kinds of ethics rules in the law and there's nobody to enforce them. That's really crazy to me that we have all of these laws on the books, but nobody to enforce them. Nobody's really worried that they're going to face real consequences. The worst thing they have to worry about is the Ethics Commission or the FPPC coming after them a few years later and sticking a little fine on them. So actually bringing teeth and accountability and enforceability to the law would be a really big thing. The public advocate kind of brings aside from being a charter cop, that is kind of like a way of addressing like soft cultural corruption, which I think is a little unique. It's not as though there's like a silver bullet that addresses every kind of corruption or dysfunction at City Hall. So it's kind of a multi-layered approach. I think a really big problem we have as far as accountability is the mayor is really not empowered and is kind of made irrelevant by the overwhelming strength of the city council. When the council president is able to whip up unanimous votes, it makes it very hard for the mayor to even think about vetoing something because they know they're just going to get overridden. So that's something to potentially keep in mind is the inner checks and balances of City Hall. Part of the reason I like the public advocate, and if you can't tell, it's kind of a pet issue, uh, is because our best way of holding people accountable is having those people with power hold each other accountable. And right now, the council president and mayor, even before these two, who are very close, often just kind of work things out behind closed doors. And in other cities with a stronger mayor, you really see the legislature and the mayor go toe to toe a whole lot more. And I think that is a healthy thing to some extent. There's obviously ways you could overdo it, but I think those natural checks and balances, that's kind of what the founding fathers looked at as far as being really powerful. Another thing they viewed as really powerful is competitive elections. You might notice if you pay attention to City Hall, there is a certain election season which comes around every 4 years, and all of a sudden, your elected official is whipping up a bunch of random money out of the couch and filling potholes, fixing streets, getting trees trimmed, and all of a sudden is turning out to the neighborhood councils and meeting and talking, and all of a sudden is in the community a whole lot more. And it's a really funny thing that is reliable like clockwork in that competitive elections do force our elected officials to turn back to the people. And in my mind, the best thing we can do is foster competitive elections because the Supreme Court has really limited what we can do to fight corruption. And there are a whole lot of problematic things in city government that might not even be illegal. But at the ballot box is how we really hold people accountable. So I think those are kind of some base level things that build in a little bit more accountability in City Hall. There was a question, why are there no alternatives to the LAPD issue that are legitimately offhands for LA City Council? There should be a substantial track record and resources evaluating various reforms of ranked choice voting. I'm not sure if I understand the question on LAPD clearly. Um, So as far as I see an additional question in there about citizens bringing ethics actions. Um, and if you want to unmute yourself, Dave, and clarify your question on LIPD, I'm happy to answer that. But as far as ethics actions, the Ethics Commission is happy to investigate anything that's sent their way. You'd be surprised as long as you're, on base and have some kind of familiarity with what you should be looking for. They do look into things. And I can personally say things that I have submitted, other people have submitted, have ended up as far as enforcement actions. Sometimes it ends up as an enforcement action. Sometimes it ends up with, them giving a warning, um, things like that. But that is a potential avenue and something that is always available to you. It is if you've got the money, there is a way that you can potentially bring charges.
Hmm.
There is a private right of action that was built into our ethics reforms 35 years ago that says if you want to file a complaint with the Ethics Commission, they have a certain amount of time to give you an answer on whether or not they want to bring enforcement or not. And if they decline to, you can go to Superior Court and bring it in front of a judge. And it's really funny because if they find in your favor, uh, half of that money goes your way, and you get attorney's fees as well.
Well,
So,
but this is similar to, I mean, there are all kinds of things like this that, you know, I remember many years ago considering the idea of having a revolving fund for taking on the city and various issues. The problem is that it really doesn't work out financially. So, except for, I mean, Fix the City does seem to sustain itself. But um, is there no other way for, things that are hands off for the city council with the LAPD that citizens, is there no other avenue for citizens that does not depend on their wallets?
um, I mean, there are indirect ways to drive attention and bring accountability. Those can be effective. The formal levers that we have. Unfortunately, we're a bit limited with what we can do with LAPD. And the folks that have the most direct power are the Board of Police Commissioners appointed by the mayor. And there's kind of like an ability to somewhat influence LAPD through the budget process.
Mhm.
Um, but with the current status quo, our options for accountability are not all that great, and it's in some ways a really frustrating thing because you would assume our 15 council members should have the ability to weigh in on something this important to the same extent that an appointed commissioner might, especially when some of these people appointed to the commission leave a bit to desired as far as their actual experience on LAPD issues.
But it seems the power really goes the other way because you got a large voting block there, and you know,
Yeah, I mean, some of this is part of the reason we're in this situation is because LAPD used to be a third rail issue where our council members were afraid to even talk about it. And now there's a bit more diversity on the council, and they're very much more willing to speak in a somewhat more critical way about LAPD. And there's only so much we can do to, you know, get around the kind of clout LAPD has on the campaign trail. They are one of the most well-resourced outside spenders in our election scheme, and our council members are very much aware of the power they have on that end of things. Um, we are a bit past our time, so I wanted to make sure we wrap things up and open things up. If there's any kind of potential coalition letter you wanted to flag and throw our way, you can email it to fairrepla@gmail.com. If you want to speak to it right now, happy to turn over the mic and give you a minute to sell it, but I don't know if anybody has anything ready to go on that front. If you do, please raise your hand. If you've got particular questions about anything we went over or anything regarding this charter and this Charter Reform Commission process, now is the time to throw those out there. We're happy to entertain them if you want to raise your hand. If you feel more comfortable just dropping it into the chat, you are welcome to do that as well. Just want to note, be cognizant of the fact that there might be others want to speak to something. So if you if you're if you have less of a question and more of a comment, please keep the comment end of things a bit more brief, just because we've all got our thoughts. Happy to have those thrown out there because I'm a charter nerd, but I want to make sure we have time for everybody to offer thoughts or questions if they've got them. I see Steve with your hand up. Steve, do you want to say something?
Yeah, quick question. Is it too late to send written comment to tomorrow's meeting?
It is not too late to send to the commissioners. It is too late to have it posted as the official written public comment on the commission website. So
Oh,
if there is something that you would like to send to the three commissioners on the government structure committee, you want to be very careful and avoid sending it to all three of them at once. If you are sending it to them all at once, send it to yourself and BCC them so that it does not loop them all into a potential Brown Act problem.
mhm.
Um, but you
what?
are welcome to directly contact them in the lead up to the meeting. The meeting is not till 4 p.m. So if you've got a good thing you want them to look at, you can feel comfortable firing that off. It would still be if you included the Charter Reform Commission's email address, it will still be posted to a future batch of public comment, so it will not be lost out there, but it is past the 3 p.m. deadline, so you cannot get it included in the formal written public comment batch that gets posted on the website for the.
If I just send it to the full commission email address, and if you could put that in the chat, that would help. If I just send it there, is it likely that the three commissioners on tomorrow's meeting will have read it before that meeting?
No.
No.
If you go to the Charter Reform Commission's website, and we will be sure to post some of these things right now. I know there was a request for the link to our YouTube page, and we will post the Charter Reform Commission's website. You can go to the About section, I believe it is, and find the individual email addresses for the commissioners. So if you want to have something considered by the three decision makers tomorrow on government structure, I would pull up the individual email addresses for Carla Fuentes, Diego Andrades, and Andrea Mack and BCC them.
Okay.
Ross has left the email address where you can submit public comment. You would want to include that as well. Um, I believe that answers the questions you had. Anything else, Steve?
No, well, the email addresses for the individual commissioners, there's someplace on the charter website as well.
Yes, Amy just dropped a handy link to the Meet Commission page, and you can learn a bit more as far as the bios of each of the commissioners, their histories, their expertise, and you can also find their email addresses.
Thank you.
And if you're really if you've got a little bit more time, especially because it's only three commissioners, you can always send it to them directly as a personal email, and you're a bit more likely to get a response from the commissioner than if it's, a BCC thing. So there are pros and cons to going both ways. And as I've noted before, these folks are volunteering their time. So please understand that they are getting a lot of emails. They are unpaid. They don't even get a stipend. Half the time, the staff doesn't even feed them food, which I'm outraged about. But they are genuinely very much trying, and you will be surprised to see the extent to which they are very much happy to offer some thoughts and response and chat with you at a meeting and yada yada yada. So uh, if you've got the time, sending it to the commissioners individually is the ideal way to do it. But obviously, if you're dealing with the full 13 member commission, BCC is a bit easier than sending off a bunch of individual emails. There was a question in the chat about if you are not with an organization. For these individual coalition letters, we are just doing organizations. There's some coalition letters people do where they have individuals on there as well, and it's just a bit tougher to kind of juggle that. So for these ones, these are just for organizations. In some circumstances, we've had petitions, which are, geared towards regular citizens being able to sign. We did that for advocacy on the Zoom thing, and we might in the future. So keep an eye out for that. But for these individual letters, it's just for organizations. Um, but talking points will be posted in a couple days. There are already some on that document, but sending a letter to the commission, especially before this Saturday's meeting, noting what you care about, what jumps out to you is a very helpful thing to do because it's a lot of public comment that gets dumped in there, and some of the commissioners maybe aren't as great as others as far as looking at everything that comes across them, but I promise you there is a good, healthy majority of these commissioners that really goes out of their way to try to read everything that gets sent to them. Any thoughts, questions? Last call for a good time? Um, Hearing none, I appreciate folks tuning in and
Hey,
learning.
sorry,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm the one who asked the question about the my account. Sorry. Um, the the coalition letter. So I'm new to all of this. I'm just trying to follow along, and you said that citizens can write the letters. Can you just clarify one more time? Like, I just write that from scratch and send that where?
Um, as far as if you're submitting individual public comment, what I would recommend is you can look to that letter for inspiration. If that is helpful as far as offering you some you know stats to point to or some arguments, you're welcome to glean from those. But I would probably not recommend just copying and pasting it. But you are more than welcome to reference those. You can say and reference the letter if you want and say, I support the reforms being pushed forward in this letter. Um, you're welcome to do that as well. But as I noted earlier, there will be talking points posted, which make it really easy. And you're very much welcome if you want to just copy and paste the talking points. They're intended to be a starting point. It's really one of those things where they're kind of training wheels, and it makes it easy to have a reference point, but you can also build off of those. And I'll just give you an example. There are certain arguments made for lowering the voting age, like it's helpful to engage voters when they're younger, when they're at home, when they're with their family. Um, an example I would give is when I first was able to vote when I was 18 years old, it was 2004 during the Democratic primary. And I lived at home. I had not gone off to college yet, and my mom was in my ear and saying, "Hey, did you fill out your ballot yet? Hey, I'm going to drop off my ballot. Do you want me to take yours?" And I was dragging my feet because I was like putting it off because there were candidates dropping out, and I was a big Howard Dean fan, and I was going back and forth. Do I vote for somebody that's still in it because he's already out? And I still wanted to vote for him, and like I literally waited till the last minute, and it was actually helpful to have somebody in my ear home and not letting me procrastinate. Um, it's also helpful because I never got engaged with local Santa Clarita politics where I grew up. And when I went off to college, I was absentee voting in Santa Clarita, but I had no idea what I was voting out in the local elections because I was removed from it. So actually getting people when they're younger, when they have somebody to show them the way, when they're able to vote on things, there are some LAUSD students who really know their local issues, who in a year are going to be off in a different state where they might not actually know what's relevant for local elections or what they're voting on in the same way they do locally. So, um, you know, in the same way I just offered how I look at the issue, the way my perspective on it has been shaped, you might want to look at the talking points and say, how can I connect this to myself? Um, why is this important to me? As much as talking points can be helpful to give some good stats and stuff, really the most impactful thing that you can offer in your written public comment or your spoken public comment is a personal touch to it and some context that really makes the commissioners think differently. So do not undervalue your personal perspective and do not feel limited by what kind of wonky issues people might be flagging on certain issues.
And just to briefly note as well, I personally go through and read all the public comment for every single meeting and just anything that stands out that makes me, as I'm just scrolling through, say, oh, this is different than something that was copy pasted. That helps your comment be more meaningful. But a lot of people are reading those, and just again, your unique voice really does matter, especially now because there's so many opportunities for people, for our policymakers and our decision makers who are really reading over sometimes every word. So it really does matter and it really does help to make that personal.
And if you go through the written public comment that the Charter Commission receives, some of them are very specifically driven letters, and some of them, the controller is putting out a call to action and saying, "Hey, help me, don't let me get gutted," and people are copy and pasting. That's fine. Do not feel like I always try to recommend to people the best thing you can do is something. Uh, because I promise you, as you kind of engage a little bit more, it'll be easier for you to make your arguments and submit public comment. You'll feel a lot more comfortable. But the most intimidating thing with in-person public comment speaking at the meeting is just doing it. And I promise that if you do it once, it will be easier the next time. And there is no reason that you need to go up there and speak for 3 minutes if you don't want to. That is how much time you will have on Saturday and on Thursday. But if you want to just go up for, 30 seconds and say, I really care about transit, or I really care about lowering the voting age, or ranked choice voting, and keep it short and sweet, that's cool too. And I promise that, when you get some of that stuff under your belt, you'll feel a lot more comfortable as things develop. I can look to some of the people I know in this room still that maybe we're a little bit concerned about what that would be like, because it can feel kind of intimidating. There's marble and shiny, nice, decadent old rooms, and terrifying, I see in the chat. But when you do it once or twice, like it makes it a whole lot easier. And I would always just kind of emphasize that there are all kinds of times where our elected officials mess up and botch the Pledge of Allegiance, or say something really embarrassing, or stumble over their words. That's human. That happens. And whatever you're doing up there, if you feel like there's an awkward pause, it's not nearly as long as you think it is. And it's you do not beat yourself or feel overly intimidated by this process.
And always feel free to just read off a prepared written statement. Whatever, again, is helping you doing something is better than nothing. It doesn't need to be necessarily be eloquent, just participating matters.
All right. Well, thank you all for trooping through it. We ran a bit longer, but happy to give a thorough rundown, and hopefully